I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Sodexo and Sodexo Magic, and I warmly welcome you to our conversation with DC Mayor Muriel Bowser. As part of our Rise with Sodexo Thought Leadership Program, we've launched this series, Conversation with America's Mayors, which we hope over the next few months will bring you various viewpoints from both Democratic and Republican mayors. Sodexo and Sodexo Magic serves thousands of clients and employs tens of thousands of people across the U.S. So the state of our cities is of the utmost importance to us. And so who better to talk to you about health, economic, and the social disruption that we've seen over the last few months than our mayors leading on the front lines. And today, as I mentioned, we are delighted to have with us DC Mayor Bowser, who is in the backyard of Sodexo's U.S. headquarters in Maryland. Mayor Bowser, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Mia. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I'll just take a minute to introduce you. And you're a woman who probably needs very little introduction, but I will share that Mayor Bowser is serving her second term and is in fact the first woman to be ever reelected as the mayor of DC. The DC mayor functions as a governor, a county executive, and a mayor. She runs Medicaid, issues driver's licenses, and has tax authority. And she also oversees the public school system across 8 wards. I would also like to remind our audience that what makes DC unique is that it takes on the burdens of a state without having voting representation in Congress or access to federal funding. So on top of all of this, you are managing in the year of 2020. And Mayor Bowser, I'd love to just get to our first question, which is about leadership. We have defined 2020 as a year that is unprecedented on so many levels. And so against the backdrop of the context around the district in which you serve, the backdrop of 2020, can you talk to us about how you are navigating all the complexities of leading in this very distinct context and environment, and what lessons or advice you might provide to leaders who are also managing the front line and all the complexities of COVID and race and disruption in general?
Right. Well, you're right to say I don't think any mayor, if you're doing the series with mayors, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Will say that they could have anticipated 2020. And I think they will also all say that they've called on every leadership lesson that they've ever learned, and they've called on each other. We call on each other to compare notes. And we are navigating at once a global pandemic of the likes we haven't seen in 100 years, the racial reckoning that you mentioned, as well as economic devastation to local budgets that for cities like ours, we didn't anticipate, but are weathering fairly well because of the stewardship of our city. So for me, I have learned a lot. I can't wait to be able to take a breath to look back on it all. I will say that I am in awe of the people who work for me, 30,000 DC residents that turned on a dime to modified government operations, distance learning, massive testing and tracing, and have done it with just the utmost competence. So I'm very proud of them. I'm also very proud of my residents who have done everything that we've asked. They are making a lot of sacrifices and they're hopeful. They remain very optimistic about our town. We're big on our town and we know that we've put ourselves in the place to come back strong. I think if there is a single leadership lesson that I continue to call on, and that is just communicating and over communicating what the stakes are, what the science is, what we're doing about it, how we're in it together, and how we're going to come out on the other end. And when you're in positions of trust like we are, that's all your constituents and residents and customers expect. They want you to be candid. They want you to communicate. They want to know that you're making the best decisions, and that if we stick together, we'll get on the other end of this.
Yeah. Thank you for that response. And I think that the lessons that you illuminated apply to business as well. I mean, it's really going back to the fundamentals, transparency, communication. And I particularly appreciate what you said about your learning every day, because there has been no roadmap. There's been no playbook for this. So I think we are all in a context where we are learning, iterating, pivoting, adjusting. And so thank you for bringing that to light. I think
Thank you.
very relatable. Let's talk about COVID. So you and many mayors and governors issued stay-at-home orders, which were, of course, issued for public safety, but have had also an adverse effect on the economic welfare of business and employees in many sectors. And so can you talk about, with all the responsibilities that come with each of your roles, how do you balance the needs of the business community, but also displaced workers, DC's financial health, and also ensuring the health and well-being of DC residents?
Well, they go together, and so I think we all have to resist saying, if we do this, is good for business. If we do this, is good for workers, because the truth is they need each other. So I can open we can have no stay-at-home orders and open all the businesses. And if people don't feel confident in what's happening health-wise with a deadly virus, then they're not coming back. We can't make people demand certain goods or services if they don't feel healthy. And so we can go out many examples of businesses that are permitted to open in our regulatory scheme that aren't serving all the people. Hair salons, for example, many hair salons are not, at their full capacity, even the limited capacity that's permitted. Because why? People aren't going to their offices. They don't get their hair done as often. Same for dry cleaners, same for restaurants. So we live in an ecosystem, not in silos. So everything affects everything else. So that's why it's so important. I kind of group how I see a safe reopening, and that is we have to have consumer confidence. Consumers have to be confident that they're going to be in protocols and their health and safety. To get schools back open, we have to have workforce confidence and parental confidence. And as a government, we have to make sure the environment is right, that we have the testing and tracing programs, that we have hospital capacity, that our transportation systems are sanitized, that our public buildings are usable and healthy. And all of those things combined is what brings our economy back.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think what you are reinforcing is that health and safety and economic prosperity are inextricably linked, and we cannot isolate them. So just along the same lines, we also know that we are living in a moment where people have been left behind, and the virus has exacerbated that. And you have been resolute in your governing that you want to make sure that we do not leave people behind. And so what would you say about the ways in which that COVID has brought to light system vulnerabilities? And what do we do about it? What does society do about it?
Well, I think one of the biggest vulnerabilities was a way to flatten the curve with COVID was to tell people to stay at home. Well, what about all the people who can't stay at home because they do essential work? And those same people we see have increased rates of infection with COVID, and also have increased levels of fatality with COVID. So that's one of the big vulnerabilities that I see, is that our essential workers are they weren't able to follow stay-at-home guidance because they were at work and serving us. Another very key vulnerability is people's connectivity to the internet. That's both for distance learning, telehealth, and medicine. And I think it's going to be a key part of how we bring the economy back. I think we're dealing with it in government. I'm sure you're dealing with it in business. Nobody wants to come back the same way. We want to come back better, and that may mean different ways of working. I don't think that the traditional office is dead. And I don't think that people are going to abandon the collegiality that comes with working in the same space, the creativity and innovation, the access to arts, culture, and entertainment that comes with office space. But I do think that we will all be challenged to have more balance. And so these are some of the things that we're thinking about as we think about bringing our government back.
You said a lot of good stuff. And first, I hope that you're right about, even though the way that we work will be different, that people will still come back to the office. Certainly our business depends on it. So expect that it will come back, but it will be different. I think that you said it well. I also will probe a little bit around what you said around essential workers in a minute, because that is also near and dear to our heart. But in the midst of COVID, Sodexo and Sodexo Magic, like many other businesses, have been asked to do what might have been unimaginable before. In DC, we have served over 1 million grab-and-go meals to students and DC residents, and it could not have been done without essential personnel, who are really on the front line of our food services. Magic Johnson was with us just before we started, and Mr. Johnson is the chairman of Sodexo Magic, which is the joint venture between Sodexo and Magic Johnson Enterprise. We are also the provider of the food services to DC public schools. And he reiterated to you our commitment to continue to work with you and Chancellor Farabee in helping the school system meet the needs of students and the community. But Mayor Bowser, charter schools have reopened, and DCPS is virtual as of now. So there's a lot to do to prioritize safety, maximize learning, promote equity. What is the role of partners, vendors, and also the community at large in ensuring that our students are set up for success?
Well, some charter schools are serving some kids. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that one part of the city is open and the other is closed. Too few kids are being served in person. I mean, I think that we all agree with that. So teachers, principals, elected officials, parents, our value is that kids should be in front of their teachers in their school buildings. And how we get there is delicate. I have to tell you, we have a lot of our brain power right now in our public schools, from the emergency operations to DCPS, working to have our kids serving more kids in person by November the 9th, which is when our second term starts. So you ask about partners. I think that partners, like the rest of us, the flexibility and innovation and being able to turn on a dime has been so helpful to us, because the thing about this virus is it's been unpredictable. It's changed over time, and we're going into another season of dealing with it. So we still may have another type of virus response to deploy. And so we are working with our partners to make sure that we can be flexible in turning up activity, and hopefully we don't have to turn it down, but how we wind it up slowly is how we have managed to manage this virus, moderately contain it, so that we can even say at this point that we'll be in school buildings.
Yeah. I think that is again, managing the safety, managing the disease is really at the heart of, can students return? So we can assume, I've got 2 school-age children, they're virtual today, and they will be virtual at least the next few weeks. And so we think all the time about internet access. Even before this, I had to tell everybody, turn it off. I need the Wi-Fi.
Right.
You have an initiative called Internet for All.
Mhm.
For Internet for All initiatives, and you've raised already millions of dollars to ensure free internet access for disconnected low-income students. So can you talk a little bit about that in particular, given the relevance? And again, as we think about partnerships, what can companies and citizens do to
Well,
help?
early on in the pandemic, we raised some money privately. We've since backfilled that with some of the CARES money that has come in from the federal government to ensure that our children have a device. And that our children, if they need it, have a hotspot so they can connect to online learning. Now, I always frequently follow that statement by saying that that is not school. And so while you may have a computer and be connected, that is not school. So that is just one step to getting our kids what they need back in their classrooms with their teachers. And what we're doing is paying. We're basically paying our local provider to provide the internet access for those families. So that is, and I see as an opportunity with every emergency, at the end of the day, we're going to see some opportunities arise. And one opportunity I know that we have and that we'll have in the city is to harden and make more resilient our internet connections. So, and I'm sure a lot of the mayors will be mentioning, how do we get to 5G? How do we have higher speeds? How do we make sure more people are connected? And that's one of the opportunities I know we'll build on coming out of COVID.
And that is a private-public partnership.
Yes.
To be, yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you all. Thank you for all you're doing, really, to
Mhm.
ensure that we do not leave children behind. Um,
Absolutely.
Coming back to something you said earlier around essential workers, I want to spend a minute talking about them because one of your areas of focus has been on supporting workers. And
Hmm.
as I mentioned, we could not have been as agile or successful in realigning our operations without our frontline employees who continue to serve in some high risk environments. We serve several hospitals in the DC area.
Thank
So
you.
we are very cognizant as well of the safety of our employees. But how do you distinguish the essential workers and their vital contributions when so many of them are working behind the scenes, trying to keep our cities and institutions running? And what would you say to those essential workers that we call heroes?
I know, and it is, I can't say enough. I mean, literally, we would not be able to function as a city. We are a workforce of just over 30,000 people. About 40% of my staff reports to their work site. The rest are on telework assignments. So that includes firefighters, police officers, sanitation workers, our Department of Health staff, my staff, the executive staff of the mayor, are reporting to work each and every day. And we've been able to offer them some very small consideration as a thank you in during this time. But I think, and when we come out of it, what we've also determined is that these folks have, in a way, also acquired a new skill during this time. I look at some of these folks, and we're deploying some of our workforce to do different jobs. Like, I'm going to be deploying 2,000 people that do something else in the government, but on election day, they're going to be poll workers. And we have others that have been deployed to set up our citywide testing sites. So we are just making our emergency response core within the government so much stronger. And so we acknowledge people in that way, that they're building their own skills and they are being acknowledged for keeping the government running. But to your point, there's more that I can do to say thank you. And we will look for ways to say thank you because we couldn't do it without them.
Yeah, I actually think what you just described is really interesting, and how productive potentially that one, you are keeping people employed by having them do the jobs that are necessary right now. But at the same time, that skill development, we hope, also contributes to mobility. So, any early, I know it, this is real time, but any early indication that, one, you're seeing workers benefit from this way of working and the movement and mobility?
Well, I can only say from a small sample of just people, just as speaking as an executive, and I'm sure many people will have this experience. Is I can see people that have risen to the occasion in big ways that I didn't know at all before. I mean, at all. So this organization we set up I changed my org chart to respond to this emergency, and it was one of the smartest things I think that I've done, because we recognized early on that the whole government it was going to take the whole government to keep us prepared and responding to COVID, and everything else takes a backseat. So we remade our org chart to be a COVID response org chart, and people who had different duties got filled in those roles. And so it exposed me to a lot of young managers and talent in my own organization that I knew that they were doing a great job, but I didn't know them well. And I think that has been a tremendous benefit. But that exists in non-pandemic times. And I tell everybody who is looking to move up in an organization, find a way to make yourself useful, get in front of your boss, and that is what I see folks doing, is pitching in and trying to help and have great ideas and serve the city in any way that they can. So I think that's just kind of a small thing. There'll be other stories like that when I talk to my managers about who should we pull up or assign to this or that initiative. And so I think that's good. It's been a good way to develop public sector managers in our organization.
I think it's a good way to also develop private sector managers.
Yes,
So again, really transferable. Thank you for that.
you bet.
Mayor Bowser, we've talked about leadership. We've talked about COVID. We've talked about the role of essential workers. We've talked about getting kids back to school safely. And now I want to talk about an issue that I think intersects all of that, which is racial equity. One of the reasons that I wanted to be part of Sodexo is I internalized their commitment to diversity and inclusion, which is so ingrained in our culture. And we have continued to be explicit about our support for racial and social justice. We acknowledge that the plight for equality is a transcendent issue, not a political one, but a human one that really defines all of us. And Mayor Bowser, I will never forget that iconic photo of you and the late Representative John Lewis.
Oh, thank you.
Large Black Lives Matter painted
Mhm.
in bright yellow letters on 16th Street. And I just thought it was a stirring glimpse of the modern day civil rights movement. Can you talk about that moment and what it meant to you?
Absolutely. So I feel pretty blessed because a couple of years ago, I went to the pilgrimage that Congressman Lewis hosted to the Pettus Bridge. And I got then, and there were a number of members of Congress and folks on the pilgrimage, but I got then to get to know him and spend some time with him. And he was so patient and so kind, and he loved young people. I'm not necessarily putting myself in that bucket, but I love elders like him who always recognized that he had a responsibility to the younger generation. And he loved young leaders. And I could just see in him just his patience in sharing his story and sharing his sacrifices, but also recognizing that his path was getting shorter and
Mhm.
that he had to pass on that knowledge. So I feel pretty, and I don't know that it's all the way sunk in, but he chose to be with us in DC at Black Lives Matter Plaza in the final days of his life. And I am proud that he had that place to be. And that those pictures will be among, the histories of John Lewis. And to remark on the kind of person he was and how I personally feel grateful to have just that little piece of history. He was the last living speaker from the March on Washington. And when we stood on Black Lives Matter Plaza, it is like diagonal to a Hilton, another Hilton hotel in the district on 16th Street. And he just kind of looked over and he says, "Oh, we stayed at that hotel before the march." And so it just was like, just a nice, kind moment, but a poignant one. Here, he was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington, and standing next to me, he could remark as the last living speaker about, just his travels around DC. So he was a giant of a man.
Yes, I would say so. And how wonderful that you had that moment with him. He will have an enduring legacy, and that last picture, I think, will never leave people's minds.
Yep.
Ingrained in mind.
Yeah.
We're wrapping up, and I'm going to ask you just one more question.
Sure.
You appear to me to be somebody who really is transformative in so many ways. Your commitment to opportunity and access across all 8 wards. You're tackling housing and homelessness, access to education, infant and maternal health, trying to build a vibrant business community, and honestly, the resilience of DC, I know, is just on your heart and mind. But you're also a relatively new mom to Miranda,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to ask you. When she is old enough to vote, what
Mm-hmm.
will you tell her about the importance of voting as a means of preserving our democracy?
Well, that's a big question, and I just hope I know my daughter will have voting in her bones, and she will know that that's her responsibility, and no matter what, she's going to vote. And she's been to the polls with me. She'll go with me again. I'm going to take her this week to the memorial for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's going to know, and she's lucky though. And so we have to. Our experience is very different from a kid that grows up that doesn't vote because they don't think it matters because nothing changes in their lives. And so those are the kids that we've got to focus on to say it does matter. Your voice matters. It's our responsibility to our democracy, but we also have to be committed to showing them that things do change when you vote for people who represent your values. Things do change. Somebody asked me, why don't people vote just recently? And I had to tell them, for some people, it's quite a logical thing not to vote because they don't see any change. So we have to change that logic. When they do vote, things do change. And they have to understand just the more global principle of it's their responsibility in a democracy to make it work. And so that's been my experience in DC. I know we talked earlier about I've been a local elected official, live in Ward 4 in Washington, D.C. I know you all are in Maryland. That's okay. It's fairly close. I know you have some good Ward 4 people that work there. We talked about the rectors and Joe McLaughlin, who's on your team, and J.R. Clark, who's a great friend, and I know helps you navigate Washington. But we appreciate good corporate partners, and we appreciate people who can adapt, like we've had to adapt during COVID and continue to serve families. I think one of the good stories that's going to come at the end of this is that we helped people, and we'll know how many people were really, they lost everything, including a means to feed their families. And to know that the government was there in the gap, is why we exist.
Yeah, I think you said that so beautifully. And I think it's government and business, right? Business
Absolutely.
platform to do good, and we have a vested interest in closing that gap. So I appreciate you closing with those thoughts. And
Thank
really,
you.
as I mentioned, the inspiration of this series came from reflecting at Sodexo about the ways in which we are all being forced to navigate an incredibly tumultuous period, and it's hard. It's been
Yes.
so hard. But this series and this conversation is important because there is something instructive and powerful to be gleaned from your leadership story. I have learned that the best leaders are those who, during crisis, are able to compel us to do collectively the really hard things that we may not do on our own. So thank you for all you are doing for DC, for your residents, for the country, and for being an example of resolute and convicted leadership. And know that we just wish you well and much success as you
Thank you.
the lead. And Mayor Bauer, we can hope, can't we? We can hope for a more
Absolutely.
prosperous future for all. We can hope.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you. And thanks
Have
for
a good one.
for joining us today.
Thank you.
To learn more about the ways in which Sodexo is helping our clients rise, please visit sodexorise.com. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Be well. Be
All
well.
right. You too. Bye-bye.